Welcome back to Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Andy.
I'm Elijah.
And today we have a very special guest with us. Would you like to introduce yourself, Gabe?
Oh, yeah. I am Gabe. I'm currently the church's intern this summer. I go to Bethel University in Mishawaka, Indiana. First time ever podcasting, so
Why are you laughing
we'll
at
see what
me?
happens. Yeah.
No, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the way that we introduce guests. Because we always say, and joining us today is our special guest, and then we say their name. And
Would you
so,
like to introduce yourself, Gabe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Gabe.
It's like you can predict the next couple of words that are going to come out.
Hey, it could be a lot weirder.
Oh, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
You could just blow me off and then
It's
just
just like
random.
20 minutes into the episode.
Oh, and by the way,
Yeah.
Gabe.
We forgot. The voice you've never heard before is actually...
This apparition that you've never heard before,
the voice
by the
of
way.
God.
Oh, Andy, you're getting replaced.
I have competition.
Yeah.
Andy plays God in every Kids Minute skit that we've ever done, so...
I mean, you got the hair.
I do, yeah. I got the lush, beautiful hair, the full-on beard at the moment, and, well, you see, we get... No. Oh.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Cut.
All right, we're going to just reset.
You can tell that Andy struggles with insecurity real bad
I
there.
struggle with being God sometimes. It's an imposing role
Do you
that
think
I don't
God accidentally had a voice crack when he was talking to Moses? Do you think that happened?
Restart.
I was going to say, is it Morgan
That's
Freeman?
That's the line. So anyhow,
Morgan
today
Freeman.
we're going to be talking a little bit about how the church responds to brokenness or things outside of what would be the perceived church normal, right? So someone comes into church and their background is just a little bit different than what people are used to, and how they respond. And we've touched on this topic in a couple of different ways. Well, if you want to go back and listen to, we have an episode on trauma. We also have an episode, last week's episode was on hard conversations. And so now we're going to have a hard conversation, I say with sunshine in my voice. And so, yeah, that's where we're coming from today.
Awesome.
Sunshine in my voice is a perfectly fine expression, Andy.
I know, but like the implications of that expression is like that you're opening your mouth and sunshine is coming out.
You called yourself God. I can have sunshine voice.
You know what? Fair enough.
So I think this is something that's a little bit harder for me to identify with because I was kind of the stereotypical what you would expect, right? Like, my parents were Christians their whole lives, pretty much. I was raised a Christian my whole life, and then I was in church.
And pastor kid. Like,
And
that's
I was
whole-
a pastor's
whole
kid,
nother
so
level,
there was
yeah.
a whole other, like...
I think it's funny the stigma that's kind of been broken this generation though of pastors' kids who are not becoming pastors. Like, my mother is a pastor's kid and she's becoming a pastor. And I'm not saying like it's 100% the case, but
He
there
says
are.
to the pastor, kid pastor.
I know. I'm sorry, but of all the PKs that I know,
Minus
none of
one.
other in my generation, oldie.
There we go.
Nobody's becoming a pastor. Like,
It's literally 3 years difference, okay?
3 years is a long time. But like, I'm just like, I'm thinking through all of my like friends throughout the years who are PKs. And I think the closest person to becoming a pastor is my brother, and he just became a theologian, which is like a different conversation entirely. But it's like not the normal case anymore. Sorry, that's just a
regardless.
side rant.
Yeah, I can't relate to that. So
No, you're good.
yeah.
This is a conversation where half of the speakers can talk about, and the other half is like, sure, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
true.
sounds about right.
Yeah, I bet you're right.
Well, and it's it's something that I don't think I'm always aware of, though. Like, sometimes I get uncomfortable in these conversations with people with different backgrounds because it's something that's just I'm not used to, right?
Right.
So I don't know how to respond. It's like it's sort of like for me, what happens, I have a chronically sprained ankle, and every time I tell somebody that, they're like, oh my gosh, does it hurt? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, well, I hope you get better. And I'm like, it's chronic. What do you? But
I'd
like,
live with it.
but like, what do you say, right? You can't. The normal thing is like to try to fix or to try to make it better, or in some way, like, oh, I hope you feel better soon. But when you can't, when there's no fix or no feel better soon, people get really uncomfortable and they just walk away, right? They're just like, oh, because we don't really know how to deal with that kind of stuff, right? We don't know how to deal with hurts that aren't easily fixed. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. I mean, everything, like depends on, circumstances and stuff, but I think especially in some of the churches that I've seen, that I've experienced, a lot of people think that they know how to handle like difficult conversations like that, and how to, like, I guess console people who come to them like with a life story or a really, really hard situation that they might be dealing with. And I think a lot of people who offer themselves, or who say, who put themselves in a position to like try to help people, have like great intentions and really do want to help. But all too often, I think that we don't really know what to say if we don't have any experiences like that ourselves, because I don't know. There's a lot of different types of like life experience that people in the church. I don't know. There's a lot of varying life experiences is what I'm trying to say, and sometimes it really can be difficult when you have never experienced something as intense, maybe, or as heartbreaking as someone coming to you like may have gone through, or maybe is going through. It can be tough to relate, and it can be tough to like actually have that conversation and like continue it, and the way you said it, I think works better. It applies much better. Sometimes I think a lot of people in the church just want to try to with good intentions, like I said, they want to try to like fix everyone and fix everything that someone's going through. But sometimes it can be really tough to just like relate with someone if you haven't gone through something like that yourself. And I think that there's probably a lot of people maybe listening too who have had experiences like that before.
I also think back on one thing that the church, at least in the West here, has been really, I can't remember where exactly I saw the quote, but they were talking about mission relief, or like, hurricane relief and things like that.
Right.
They said churches are excellent at immediate help, right? When a crisis happens, they will step up to it. They will do the work, but they're really, really bad at long-term care.
Kind of like the flood relief here in
which
Midland.
Ooh,
one aspect that I think that, at least from the perception for somebody who came from the outside, it seems like this is one of the better long-term things that I've seen. I've seen people continuing to do things, and so I've been it's really cool to witness that. But like, especially when I went down to Slidell, Louisiana to help after Hurricane Katrina, it was probably like 5 or 6 years later, and we were still doing work. And people forget that that's, and I think we do the same thing, but on a personal level, where it's like that work that we need to put in. We're really, really good at the broken arms, okay? You break your arm and you need help with stuff around the house. The church will be like, yeah, let me get in there. But then that chronic stuff, we don't understand it as much. It's almost like somehow it gets, but I don't know. I don't know the best way to word it, but I think that's caused a lot of people unintentionally to feel like they don't have a place in the church, right?
Yeah.
And why it's so important to have people share their stories of how this perception of normal, because I believe it really is a perception. I don't think that most people live up to that perception of normal who are inside of our churches.
What are we even really referring to when we talk about this perception of normal? I'm having a tough time kind of following what that really even means.
Well, what does your perception of what a normal churchgoer would look like?
I don't really know if I have a perception of a normal, like an idea of what a normal churchgoer is. I mean, maybe that's just because I haven't actually attended a church service in over a year and a half, it feels like now. But
What about you
I don't
guys?
know. I don't. I guess I don't know if it's just something that I ever really like think about.
Yeah.
Because maybe this is just because of where I've come from, or maybe I don't know. Regardless of the reason, the church that I went to that was really, really focused on youth growing up, I met a lot of people who had, whose family was Christian, who had grown up in the church, and they grew up in that environment. They followed sort of in the that idea of growing up Christian, like they followed in the footsteps of that. They became part of the leadership of like the youth program or on the worship team. But I also met tons and tons of people, youth who were coming in, some who were really involved with the church and some who were just sort of attending, who really came from like very, very broken families. And we're coming to church from times or in the middle of times of extreme hardship, and that wasn't really considered abnormal to me because I was around a lot of that experience. And I think that's probably because my idea of like going to church wasn't even as much of the traditional Sunday service, but it was more of the youth program. Like that was more of what I considered my church, because I was just around those experiences like a lot more. But I don't know, maybe because of that, I guess when I think of normal, like I don't really even know what to think of it, because I've been around, like, if we're talking about things that people have gone through, like in plain terms, I've been around like both experiences a lot. Been around people who have like I said, come from extreme hardship, as well as people who have grown up in the church basically their whole lives. I've been around both.
What about you guys? Do you guys have any, like, what would you perceived churchgoer? Because I definitely have a very distinct image that comes to mind when I think of it.
See, I do too, but my idea also changes based on the church that I'm at or the community that I'm in.
Okay.
It's kind of like, like that bag of cookie cutters that you like pull out around Christmas. Each one is like its own identical shape. Mm-hmm. Some of them could be like really close to each other, but like have slight differences or that kind of a thing. But I think like this church specifically that we're in, we have a cookie cutter, like we have a few outliers, but there's
I think
I could define like our normal churchgoer.
Sure.
Like really easily here.
That makes sense.
The thing is, I don't think it properly reflects our community at all.
That's fair.
Because, and I guess I've just probably become more aware of it like recently, but Midland, although yes, we do have a reflection of like very, very, very rich neighborhood, like all that kind of a thing. I've found that if you travel a mile south of where my house is, like the community changes drastically. Like I live around the golf course, and so we have a lot of rich white, like that kind of a thing, like right there around that golf course.
Sure.
But if you do just travel that mile south, their houses are in shambles. There is like houses that honestly I think of as normal pastor parsonages, but they suck. Like, no offense, like the people living there, like completely. It's
like, a different standard of living, right?
Yeah,
compared to right where you are.
It completely changes.
Yeah.
But that's not reflective in this church. Mm-hmm. There is a large community of people living in essentially a trailer park north of Midland. That isn't reflective in this church at all. And like you have those different things. And so this church built by Dow has had this influence of money. And so we have those rich white people. You have white people who like have more power and influence. And I'm going to kind of say that our youth are kind of cookie cutter too. And I haven't spent full time with youth, so like feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
I've only been here a couple of weeks, and I've only attended 2 youth group nights. Mm-hmm. So,
but like with your tattoo, like this whole idea of brokenness, or like a home that's not complete with 2 parents, or that kind of a thing. It's something that it's like we haven't seen you in the church, and like not to say like
Yeah.
you in particular, but like we haven't seen like people of that nature in the church in a while, or that kind of thing. And again, I haven't met all of our youth. I haven't spent time. I haven't heard their testimonies.
Just to clear up, my tattoo is it's Greek. It's the word hupomone, which means endurance or patient enduring. So I kind of got that as like my 23rd birthday present. So that's kind of a reminder for me to keep going and to keep pressing on. So just a little context for that.
Yeah, and so and Gabe, what has your experience been with the average churchgoer or things like that? Because I know that your story, if you do want to share a little bit of your background, which is totally up to you. Yeah, I think this would be a great time.
Yeah, so I'm the middle child. I have an older brother and younger sister. Yeah, middle child power.
Yep.
I don't know
if that counts as power.
No, not your typical middle child. I'm very quiet to myself, but so I was raised by a single mom, and so my mom had 3 kids by the time she was 21. So we're all close in age, and I come from a fatherless background. My dad lived in the Flint, Schwartz Creek area most of my life, but then unexpectedly passed away when I was 8 years old due to a drug overdose on OxyContin. And there's certain theories. I mean, I've talked with some of my dad's family about it could have been a suicide or it was an accidental drug overdose. So I don't really know. So so growing up with a dad was kind of rough for me because we're not only that single parent households, the income is cut in half,
Yeah.
And I actually got some stats just for the type of people out there who are into that and stats make sense to them. Let me look here. So yeah, 27% of solo, this would kind of be like single mothers, live below the poverty line. And I don't know if we were ever that poor, but we definitely weren't rich. So, I mean, we lived in some rundown places in Bay City, and I lived in Saginaw for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And actually living in Midland, this is like one of the nicer houses I've ever had. So it's kind of been weird, but I know my older brother and I, we would see these kids at our schools. They have a mom, a dad, and 2 siblings, and we'd be like, wait, well, where's that?
Okay.
And so for me, we always craved that male father figure, and I was blessed with having my former youth pastor kind of step in. That was actually his first year he was hired, and he's the one that broke the news to my brother and I that our dad had passed away when we got out of school.
Wow.
So, and I've always noticed some sort of a stigma with single mom households.
Okay.
I have been in churches where I go to school in Indiana that offer programs for assistance for single mothers, which I love seeing. I mean, it's not just single moms, single dads need help too. If grandparents are raising the kids due to circumstances that don't have both parents in the picture, they need help too. I mean, we all need to come together and help each other. But before I attended a church in Indiana, I'd never really have saw any much assistance for that kind of stuff. So that was really nice to see, because I knew the struggle of it growing up, and seeing my mom work 60 hours a week, breaking her back to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table for us. So I mean, and then just kind of having come from a broken home, it always presents behavioral issues because there's not enough accountability. I mean, I thank God that my mom's mom, my grandma, was always there to watch us after school, and that's where I became a Detroit Tigers fan, was watching games with her when she'd babysit us.
Yeah.
So way to go, Grandma. Yeah. Hey,
What's wrong with the Tigers?
They're not good.
Okay, listen, when I was in high school, they were great.
They're not good now.
No,
they were great in 2011.
But if you know their prospects, we got some hopefully going on. Anyways, that's different.
Sorry,
I could talk forever.
It's a different podcast.
I could talk forever about that.
Church is stupid,
Sports
baseball.
edition.
Yeah. But I mean, I was blessed with I never really had the need or want to act out. even though I could have definitely gotten into some drug and gang activity based on the areas I lived and grew up in, kind of the shadier places. But I was also blessed with coming from a small church in Bay City where we knew everybody and people came together and supported us. So I was blessed with not having that stigma around.
That's awesome.
But you also did kind of feel, at least I did, kind of like inherent pressure, or I don't know, like a paranoia with, because I didn't have the money that other kids could do. And so like I never asked for anything. I never asked to be involved because I didn't want my mom shelling out money when she could use that for other things. Like I didn't really go on, like, because we do trips to Michigan Adventures, and I'm like, I don't want to burden her with that, even though, you know, $35 may not seem like a lot, but you never know where that could go. So I mean, that was kind of like, in my mind at least, kind of like a paranoia with money issues and everything,
like a constant reality, right?
Yeah. And and stuff has come out of that, and I have talked to my mom about this, and I love her to death, but there's a lot of things in my childhood that have impacted me due to that instability.
Yeah.
And she shouldn't be upset with that or anything. She did the best she could with what was given, or in how she worked. But there's things, obviously, as you grow older and you want to learn more about yourself and what makes you tick. And I found out that a lot of instability in my childhood has made me tick in certain ways. Yeah. And I was actually talking to someone about this with Ruth earlier while we got McDonald's and everything. So, I mean, I know not, it's like Andrew said, it's always the areas, depending on how you see like where people in the church fit and if they're connected. But it can be a struggle at times because people don't want to be a burden to each other, and when we're called to carry each other's burdens and to not walk alone.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even looking at that first example of that community back in Acts that came together, and I think a lot of times we look at how it says that they shared all of their resources, but they shared all of their burdens as well. I think they shared their life together, and sometimes we forget that that's, especially hearing, you know, resources for single mothers or for people who are struggling. Resources are great, and we need resources, but we also need relationships as well. And sometimes that's like one of back in, a while back, when my dad was surveying a church in Algonac, Michigan, they hosted a Thanksgiving dinner. Right, it's kind of a common thing, I think, that churches do. Yeah. And I remember they asked me to just go talk with people, and I was like, I don't know, 14 or 15. So of course I'm an introvert, and so I'm like, okay, great. But you know what? People appreciated that so much, and I got to hear a little bit about like other people's stories. I think sometimes, especially because we don't talk about it, but because we don't share those stories, we're almost, it's too easy to other people to be like, oh, those people aren't in our church or something like that. When I think that there are people in our church who struggle with a lot of things that we don't know about because they feel like they can't talk about it. And I'm so glad that you had a youth pastor that could step up and talk with you about that.
Yeah, he was anger management counselor, anxiety counselor, and for as a child, I mean, and being raised by a single mom can only do so much especially with two sons, because you know things get awkward. We don't have to talk all about specifics of that. It can, and I can share some funny stories with certain things like that. But just the fact that this guy wanted to spend time with me, and I didn't have to do anything to earn it, was like, I mean, I'm tearing up as I'm thinking about it because I didn't do anything. He just wanted to spend time with me, and that's why I wanted to get in youth ministry, because that's what I noticed when I was working with Bethel University in 2019, where I was a counselor, and I saw some of these kids coming from fatherless backgrounds or foster homes, and they just wanted people to spend time with them, and they didn't want to feel like they had to give something up. And for a kid, time equals love, and that can be said for almost anybody, but especially when they're going through that crucial development phase early on in their life and they're learning their social skills and whatnot. It's incredibly crucial, and I thank God for Pastor Brian every day that he was able to bless me through that. I mean, all the times we spent cooking out at his house, or eating at Taco Bell after school, just hanging out,
Taco Bell.
just doing guy stuff. And that's what I craved the most as a kid, and that's what I want to do as I move forward in my life and to get into youth ministry too.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, that's such I mean, what I think Elijah was about to say this, but what an example of Christ's love. You know, I mean,
Exactly.
that is exactly what we're called to do as Christians. Is we're not supposed to make people beg or anything for it, but it's just being there, being present. And I think for especially one thing I've noticed in churches that very well intentioned want to get involved in these ministries don't understand that lashing out is a natural part of that process and struggle with that. So I loved you mentioning that he was working with you on things like anxiety and anger issues, because a lot of times when those things come up, churches I've noticed tend to be like, oh, well, they're like a lost cause or things like that.
Well, and then another thing with I've noticed when you come from like a broken home, some people are very prideful if you try to ask for help, if you try to approach them for help. And I noticed that when I went on the mission trips to Redbird Mission in Kentucky with Pastor Brian for 5 years. And the people who ran it always told us, don't ever try to give the people that you're like working on their houses for money, because they'll take that as an insult.
Yeah.
So give it like through the organization, they'll help them out. And that sometimes can happen in the church because people work hard to get what they want. They're proud of, even though in the midst of their struggle, they're proud of what they've been able to put together with their own two hands and their own time and energy.
Well, and it can come off a little bit, again, condescending.
Yeah,
This
and they're like,
idea
oh,
of
like
a power dynamic,
and like
and you don't want to feel like
no,
less than.
nobody wants to be looked down upon.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to feel like the least of these type of things.
And it definitely doesn't help with some of the stigmas that surround the church in America too, that I'm sure only add on to like that sort of feeling of almost like maybe not intentional, but the feeling of being almost insulted and looked down on by a church.
And especially if you don't have a relationship or a knowledge of who the person in the church is asking or this, or if, say, like the reputation isn't as best, obviously there's some shady things that could happen, and there's everyone has every right to be a little paranoid, because you know you're inviting these people into your home to meet with your kids or to help them out, and you don't know what they're going to do, and you can't risk that. So and that's understandable of people to be a little standoffish, but we also need to try to bridge that medium to help and reach people too, and that can be tricky at times.
Okay.
Absolutely. And as we're gearing up at the end of our first episode of the week, I think it's important to note that that's one of the reasons, again, why we're here doing what we do, because I think a lot of the things that we talk about are barriers that can get in the way of those kinds of relationships. You know, we talked once about money and that the church that requires you to give your bank statement and when you become a member, so that way they can take 10% and know that you're giving that. And it's like, for somebody, it's excluding, you know, you're going to take money from a single mother working 60 hours a week who can barely feed their, you know, and particularly it's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of like tithing campaigns, not because I think that tithing is bad, but I think we don't realize that if you're fortunate enough to be able to afford to tithe, that's awesome. But some people really can't, and we shouldn't shame people for that. And a lot of the other topics we talk about are really barriers that create this, again, this us versus them mentality, without realizing that there are already they is already among us, and there are no don't do the Among Us thing. Gosh, darn it.
Kind of sus to me, but you know.
But that those barriers don't exist in the kingdom of God.
And that's what I love about the church, because yet there can be so many issues, but also you have all these people who come from all these different backgrounds to represent the body of Christ, and they can help each other in each special in certain ways.
Absolutely.
Whether that be helping people understand the difficulties other people go through, whatever that may be. We have a lot of issues going on in our world, and everyone can relate. And we're supposed to come along, help carry each other's burdens, and walk with them this life and show them what a Christ-centered community can be like. But I also know that's not possible at times because people get in their own way.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's what I love. That's what I love about the church most. You get all these broken people. It's almost like a mosaic art piece, and it makes up the image of Christ. And that's what I love, and that's what I try to see in whatever church I attend. Even though there may be some things you hear from other people, and you try to be as unbiased as possible.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment to end our episode on.
I agree.
So from all of us here at Church is Stupid,
Come a butt.
I'm Ruth,
I'm Andy.
I'm Elijah.
I'm Gabe.
and thank you for listening. We hope you have a great week.